Would you rent to someone who has been evicted from a previous home before? Now, how do you actually determine if they've been evicted from a home before? Are they likely to give you that previous landlords or property managers information to call as a rental reference? Well, that's why the eviction history report comes into play when you are doing tenant screenings on your rental applicants. But is every eviction reported on an eviction history report? Technically, yes, but I want to dive deeper into what it means to actually get evicted and how that information may or may not show up on an eviction history report when you're doing tenant screening. My name is Kaycee Miller. I work for Rentec Direct property management software. I'm also a landlord, a real estate investor, and a real estate developer. I've also been writing about landlord-related topics for over a decade on the Rentec Direct blog. Today, we're going to be talking about eviction history report and what it means to actually have that record show up on eviction history report. So when you go through an eviction process, it's actually a legal process that has to be filed with a court, and you need to go to court, have a judge rule in favor of a landlord to proceed with an eviction, get an unlawful detainer, which is what the legal term for an eviction is, and then that is the record that goes on an official eviction history report that might get reported when you're doing a tenant screening report. So you might have a tenant that says, or a rental applicant that says, oh, I've been evicted before, but so you might see that on my background check. And then you run the report and you're like, hey, why is this not showing up? The tenant definitely told me they were evicted. What could that mean? Typically, my analysis of what that could mean is that a tenant might have received notice from a landlord to clear or quit, which is basically a lease violation, non-payment of rent, where a landlord is then saying, hey, you either need to remedy this situation, pay the rent, fix the problem that got the lease violation notice, or you're going to have to move out. And even that notice can feel to a renter like they are getting evicted. And they might not realize that that eviction isn't going to show up on the record or their official eviction history record, but it could still feel like they were evicted from a property. I've heard of tenants even feeling like a landlord is selling the house that they live in, so they got a notice like, hey, you have to move. Again, no lease violations happen, but the tenant is feeling, oh my gosh, I'm getting evicted, and using that kind of buzzword evicted to feel like they're getting displaced from their housing, even though there's nothing wrong legally that a tenant did, and it's not going to go on their record. So that's why you can use an eviction history report, which is really useful if you want to dive into rental applicants' legal background to see if they really have gone through the long length of a lease violation that then led to a notice, that then led to an eviction filing happening, then a court date, and a landlord ruling in favor of judge ruling in favor of the landlord to move forward with the eviction. And that's where then the sheriff can show up and you can officially escort a tenant off the property, change the locks. And that is what the official eviction process is. And so if those show up on an eviction that's what would show up on an eviction record report for a rental applicant. But someone who maybe just violated a lease, got the notice to cure or quit, and then left the property, that would not have shown up on an eviction record report. That kind of information is what would come up when you're doing a rental address verification through your tenant screening report. You might ask a tenant like, yes, give me landlord references for places that you live, but also give me a history of the different addresses that you lived. And so what we've done in the past with my rental properties is when we get a property address, we can Google it, find out who the owner of that address is, and then call to say, hey, did this tenant actually live there? And then sometimes in that phone conversation, the owner of the house or the property manager or the landlord might share like, yes, they live there, and here's my experience with them as a renter. They were great, or maybe we had to move forward with the cure or quit because we had experience with them violating the lease or doing non-payment of rent. So eviction history reports can be really useful in the tenant screening process because you have to consider what were the cases that made this tenant not be able to fulfill their lease term or leave on not great terms with their previous landlord or property manager. And then also consider like, well, did this happen a really long time ago? Was it in the middle of one of the recessions? Are there situations that could have caused this displacement of housing or requirement to move out or cure or quit or an eviction process that could be shown to not be likely to happen again? So those are all things to think about when it comes to evaluating a rental applicant's eviction history as part of your tenant screening process. We always think about all the different reports that you can look at that can help you make a rental decision in order to find the most qualified tenant for your rental property. In tenant screening, you can look at a credit report, a criminal background report, an eviction history report, an address verification, a social security number verification report, registered sex offender report. These are all different reports that give you great data in order to make a decision on whether or not your rental applicant is going to be a qualified tenant to live in your rental house. My name is Kaycee. I work for Rentec Direct property management software. You can always find lots of advice about how to be a great landlord, how to be a great property manager, and different tips on what it takes to be successful in the rental industry on the Rentec Direct blog, and follow us for more videos.